The summer sun was soft that Saturday afternoon, filtering through the branches of the old oak trees in my brother's backyard. Laughter carried on the warm breeze, mixed with the scent of grilled meat, charcoal smoke, and freshly cut grass. It should have been a perfect day, a wholesome, simple family gathering, but I didn't know then that this day would carve a scar into both my heart and my son's innocence. "Come on, Ethan, bring your toys," I said, helping my little boy gather his backpack filled with his favorite action figures and his beloved stuffed lion. Ethan was only 6, bright-eyed and shy, and those toys weren't just plastic to him. They were his companions, his comfort when the world felt too big. We arrived at my brother's house, where his wife Claire greeted us with her usual tight smile. It wasn't warm, nor was it entirely hostile. It was that kind of smile that says I'm pretending for everyone else's sake. She brushed a strand of her perfectly styled hair behind her ear and leaned down just enough to air, "Kiss me on the cheek." "You're late," she remarked lightly, though there was a sharpened edge beneath her words. Traffic had delayed us, but I didn't bother explaining. "Good to see you too, Claire." Ethan ran off to join his cousins, clutching his toys tightly. I watched him settle on the grass under the shade of a tree, lining up his little soldiers in neat rows. My heart softened. He was content, at least for now. The afternoon unfolded with the usual mix of chatter and passive-aggressive comments. My brother manned the grill, boasting about his new promotion. My father sipped a beer, smiling faintly but saying little. And Claire floated about like the self-appointed hostess of the year, correcting people's plates, complaining about how much work it was to organize everything, and throwing me looks that were too subtle for anyone else to notice but not for me. "Emily, maybe next time you could bring a proper salad," she said at one point, wrinkling her nose at the simple fruit bowl I'd made. "You know, something healthy." I bit back a response, choosing silence. I'd long since learned that Claire thrived on getting reactions, on drawing me into her games. Ethan, meanwhile, kept to himself, playing quietly near the fire pit where the grill smoked. He tried once or twice to show his cousins his toys, but they weren't interested. They were older, glued to their phones, rolling their eyes at him. I felt a pang of sadness but reassured myself. At least he had his toys. They always made him feel safe. As the evening drew on, the sky deepened into shades of orange and pink. The children disappeared inside for video games, leaving the adults lingering around the fire pit. Ethan came to my side, holding my hand tightly, his lion tucked under his arm. "Mama, can I leave my toys here while we eat? I'll get them after," he asked softly. I smiled down at him. "Of course, sweetheart, just keep them close." He set them carefully on the bench near the fire pit, as though they were sacred treasures. Dinner passed in a blur of laughter, boasting, and the clinking of glasses. I tried to relax, but something felt off. Claire's glances lingered too long, her smirks too smug. Still, I pushed it aside. It wasn't until we were preparing to leave that my heart sank. "Ethan, go grab your toys," I said, buckling my bag. He ran to the bench. Moments later, his small voice broke the air. "Mama, they're gone." I froze. "What do you mean gone?" We searched everywhere. The bench, under the chairs, inside the house, even the yard. My stomach twisted tighter with every passing second. Then Ethan's cries pierced the air. He was standing near the fire pit, pointing with trembling hands. "Mama, look." The smell hit me first, burned plastic, sharp and acrid. My eyes followed the smoke curling up from the dying embers of the fire pit, and there, half, melted and charred beyond recognition, were Ethan's toys. His lion, his soldiers, his favorite action figure all reduced to ashes. Ethan screamed, tears streaming down his face as he tried to reach for them. I caught him in my arms, holding him back, my own chest burning with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Who did this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Oh, Emily, calm down," Claire said smoothly from behind me, her lips curling in that insufferable smile. "It must have been an accident." Kids throw things into the fire all the time, but no one's child here would have done that. Ethan's cousins had been inside the whole time, and when I looked at Claire, really looked, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Satisfaction. My brother placed a hand on my shoulder awkwardly. Don't make a scene, Em. They were just toys. Just toys. I held my sobbing son, feeling his little body shake against mine. And in that moment, a part of me broke. It wasn't just the toys. It was the cruelty behind it. Someone had wanted to hurt my child, to crush his spirit, to send a message to me. And I knew deep down who it was, but I stayed quiet, for now, because betrayal this deep didn't deserve an immediate outburst. No, it demanded something far greater. It demanded revenge. The ride home from the barbecue was the longest drive of my life. Ethan sat in the back seat, his face buried in the window, silent except for the occasional sniffle. His small hands clutched the strap of his seatbelt, as if it were the last thing tethering him to safety. Every few minutes, he whispered, "Why, Mama? Why did they do that?" And each time, my throat tightened because I didn't have an answer. How could I tell him that sometimes cruelty isn't random, that sometimes it is deliberate, that someone you call family can harbor enough malice to destroy the only treasures of a 6-year-old child? When we reached home, Ethan went straight to his room. Usually, he lined his toys carefully on his shelf, saying good night to each one like they were his friends. That night, he simply curled up on his bed, the space beside him achingly empty. I sat on the edge of the bed, stroking his hair until he fell asleep, though his little body trembled even in dreams. I crept back to the living room, sat in the dark, and stared into the shadows. My mind replayed the moment over and over, the smoke, the charred remains, Claire's smug smile, my brother's dismissive words. Just toys, the phrase clawed at my chest until it ached. No, they weren't just toys. They were Ethan's companions, his safety, his childhood in miniature. Whoever burned them knew exactly what they were doing. Over the next few days, I tried to shake it off. But Ethan wouldn't let me forget, not that I wanted to. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. At school, his teacher called me in, concerned. "Emily," she said softly, "Ethan's been distracted. He cried during recess because he said someone took his friends away. Did something happen?" I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Yes, something happened. That night, Ethan asked me the question that sliced me open. "Mama, does Aunt Claire hate me?" I froze. He was too young to carry such a thought. But I saw the fear in his eyes, the way he chewed on his lip, waiting for an answer. "No, sweetheart." I lied gently, pulling him close. "She doesn't hate you. Some people just don't understand how special you are. But I do, and I'll always protect you." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. His trust in family, in safety, had been cracked, and I couldn't forgive that. The suspicion gnawed at me day after day. Claire had always had her ways of needling me, of reminding me that she thought I didn't belong, that I didn't deserve the love of my family. I thought back to years ago, when our mother passed away. Her will had been clear. She left me her jewelry, a collection that wasn't particularly valuable in money, but priceless in sentiment. Claire had thrown a fit about it. "It's not fair," she'd snapped. "Why should Emily get everything? We have kids too, you know. We could sell that jewelry and put it to good use." My brother hadn't argued with her. He never did. He stood by her side, silent, letting her venom flow unchecked. I'd told myself then that it was just grief speaking. But now, years later, I realized it wasn't grief. It was jealousy, a constant, festering resentment that had only grown stronger. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Claire had always criticized Ethan, even subtly. "He's too sensitive. You baby him too much. He doesn't know how to play with other kids." She always found a way to undermine him, to paint him as weak or spoiled, and now his toys had ended up in the fire. An accident, no. I didn't believe in coincidences that cruel. I began quietly digging. Not openly. Not yet. Instead, I asked gentle questions when I saw my nieces at the park, or when my father mentioned the barbecue again. So, I asked my oldest niece one afternoon, "Did you see what happened to Ethan's toys?" She hesitated, looking at the ground. Aunt Claire told me not to touch them. My pulse quickened. She did. Yes, she said they were in the way. I kept my voice calm, though rage simmered under the surface. "Did you see what happened after that?" The girl shifted uncomfortably. "I saw her pick them up. She carried them toward the fire, but then she told me to go inside. When I came back out, they were gone." Her eyes darted to mine, guilty for even admitting it. "Don't tell her I said that. She'll be mad." I hugged her, masking my fury with a smile. "Don't worry, sweetheart, you're safe with me." Inside, my heart pounded. The picture was becoming clearer. Claire had done it. She deliberately burned Ethan's toys, and she'd done it with a smile. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, she wanted to hurt me through my child. And it worked. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult, any argument, any petty remark from the past. She had taken my son's happiness and turned it into ashes, but I wouldn't stay broken. No, not this time. If Claire thought she could crush me, she was wrong. I would not only uncover every ugly truth she tried to hide, I would make her pay. And when I did, I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't rage, I would be calm, precise, patient, because the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It's devastating. The confession came like a breath that had been held too long, sudden, fragile, and impossibly heavy. I'd planned to ask casually, to let words slip out without pushing anyone into a corner. But when my youngest niece, Lucy, sidled into the garden with her cat tucked under her arm and sat tentatively on the swing, I realized my questions wouldn't be casual anymore. The look in her eyes told me she had already been carrying something far too big for her small shoulders. "Lucy," I began, keeping my voice soft so it wouldn't startle her, "do you remember the barbecue last Saturday?" She nodded, swinging her legs a little, the chain creaking. "Yes, Aunt Em. Did you see what happened to Ethan's toys?" She stopped mid-swing. "I did." Her fingers tightened on the swing's chain. I didn't want to say Claire told me not to tell anyone. My chest tightened. This was the moment everything slid from suspicion into awful, undeniable reality. I sat beside her, close enough to be a comfort, far enough to let her keep her space. "What did you see, sweetheart?" I asked. Lucy's voice was small. "I saw Aunt Claire pick them up. She pretended she was cleaning, but she lowered her head, and when she spoke again, the words came out in a rush, like a child afraid she'd be stopped mid-sentence. She took them to the fire. She smiled when she threw them in. She said, 'That'll teach him to be spoiled.'" The world bent around me for a moment. The back of my throat tightened until I could barely breathe. A small, bright part of me, the part that had wanted to believe it was an accident, sputtered and died. Lucy's admission fit too precisely with the image that haunted my mind. Claire's smug smile, the way she'd appeared suddenly content as the smoke curled up from the pit. "Did anyone else see?" I asked quietly. Lucy's lower lip trembled. "No. I ran inside because I was scared. I didn't tell because she said if I did she would make my life hard." Anger flared so fast it burned. Not for myself, but for the child before me, who'd been bullied into silence, and for my son, whose playthings had been turned into a message. But I swallowed it. Lucy needed protection, not a scream. "Thank you for telling me," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. I hugged her, long and firm. "You did the right thing. I'll take care of this." That night I lay awake on the couch, the house quiet but for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Pieces of the day assembled themselves into a frame. Claire's earlier jabs about my parenting, the flash of brazen satisfaction when she realized Ethan's toys were gone, my brother's silence. The puzzle had a colder edge now. This wasn't just jealousy. It was deliberate cruelty aimed at my child, at me. I could have confronted Claire immediately. A heated scene would have been glorious in the moment, Tears, raised voices, shredded reputations. But I'd learned in painful ways that righteous anger could be short-lived. It might flare, burn, and then be smothered by excuses and denials. If I wanted her punished in a way that lasted, I needed proof. I needed witnesses. I needed a plan that left no room for doubt. So I became quiet. I watched. I gathered. First, I spoke to my father, who had been at the barbecue but had seemed uninterested in the small things, content to sit back and watch. He flinched when I told him Lucy's account. For the first time since our mother's funeral, I saw a true concern in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low. "Lucy told me." I said, "She's a child, but she's honest. She wouldn't make this up." My father pressed his hands together. "Claire, she's always been difficult, but I never thought she'd hit a child that way. You didn't see the way she looked," I said. "You didn't hear Ethan. He thinks Aunt Claire hates him." His face slackened. We were both silent for a moment, the memory of family dinners and holidays strewn with half-words and old wounds. "If you want, I can talk to her," he offered cautiously. "No," I said before he could finish. "Not yet. If she's cunning enough to manipulate a child into silence, she'll manipulate you too. I need more than talk. I need something I can show people that can't be dismissed." So I turned detective in the quietest parts of my life. I started collecting the small things that made up larger patterns. I printed texts and emails where Claire's tone cut thinly through kindness and revealed contempt. I quietly recorded conversations where she bragged about how she taught people their place. I saved social media posts where she painted herself as the martyr and the perfect mother, while slipping in digs about those she considered weaker. Recording wasn't easy. It took time to catch her off guard, to ensure the true colors emerged without her raising suspicion. Once, during a school event where Claire and I both chaperoned, I waited until the bus of children boarded before striking up casual conversation. She laughed, the sound sharp and practiced. "You spoil him too much, Em," she said, the words half a jest, half a knife. "Kids like discipline. Toys aren't indulgent." I felt my pulse climb, but the recorder in my bag was steady. Later, when I listened back, her voice was recorded clear as day. The laugh, the scorn, the little admission that she believed in teaching lessons by humiliation. I also reached out gently to friends and relatives who might be willing to speak candidly. A cousin who worked with Claire at a boutique confided that Claire had a pattern of kindness that flipped into cruelty when she felt slighted. Another neighbor mentioned overhearing Claire boasting about sending a message to someone who'd crossed her. When I asked my brother about the toys, he fumbled and offered a week. I thought it was an accident. The look he gave Claire, that quick, apologetic glance, said more than his words. Collecting evidence, though, mattered most. With Lucy's confession, the neighbor's remark, and the in the clear recordings, the narrative began to coalesce. This was not paranoia. This was not overreaction. It was a chain of intentional acts. As the pieces came together, my righteous hurt began to harden into something else, strategic clarity. I found myself charting a path forward with a calm I hadn't felt since, before all of this began. The plan was not to destroy for destruction's sake. It was to dismantle the facade Claire had built, the smiling hostess, the doting mother, the woman who always looked immaculate and preached family values. Behind her public face was a small, bitter thing that fed on humiliation. Expose that, and her power would crumble. The first phase would be personal exposure. I would show the family, my reluctant, protective brother included, what she had done. But public shame could be fleeting, so I aimed for a longer, more durable route. Claire's professional life, her social connections, even her standing within the local parent group. These were tangible things she cared about. I would highlight her cruelty in places that mattered to her, if she was proud of being the perfect mother and respected community member. Stripping those layers away would be a punishment she could not easily shrug off. I also considered another, softer objective. healing for Ethan. Revenge without repair would leave a hollow victory, and my son's trauma needed attention, not just spectacle. Therapy, new rituals to rebuild his trust, small acts of love that would replace the charred memories with something kinder. These would be integral to my plan. I would make sure he saw that family could still mean safety, that love was stronger than cruelty. Late one evening, while I arranged the printed screenshots and transcripts into neat piles, a small sound tugged at me. Ethan's bedroom door cracked open, and he padded out in socks, rubbing his eyes. "You okay, Mama?" he asked, voice sleep, soft. I scooped him into my lap before I answered. He smelled of toothpaste and childhood. "I'm okay, baby," I whispered. "We're going to fix this." He looked up at me with sleepy trust and pressed his face against my neck. "Will Aunt Claire be sorry?" I tightened my arms around him and nodded, though the word sorry felt too small. "She will understand that what she did was wrong, and we will make sure she can't hurt anyone like that again." In the hush of that small moment, I felt resolved. The truth had been found, fragile but real. I had the beginnings of proof and the willingness to see things through. I would not become the kind of person who ruined lives for sport, but I would do what was necessary to make sure no other child in our family would be told their value could be burned away. The next morning, I began to set the pieces in motion. I planted questions in casual conversations to gauge who would stand with me and who would crumble. I scheduled an appointment with a counselor for Ethan as if it were a routine checkup, then arranged for a subtle, private meeting where Lucy could tell her story with adult support. I prepared to show the recordings to my father first, a careful, compassionate reveal, and then to my brother when the time was right. Beneath all of this, a colder undercurrent ran like a steady current. I would not let this go. Betrayal had been laid bare, and now the response would be equally deliberate. Not in loud outrage, but in the slow, surgical dismantling of a person who had chosen to wound a child for sport. By dusk the following week, I had a folder labeled evidence in my bag. Screenshots, transcriptions, a shaky video from a neighbor's phone, Lucy's written note. I slid it into the drawer beside my bed, and, for the first time since the toys burned, let myself sleep without the frantic buzzing of not knowing. When morning came, so did clarity. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a weapon, not for vengeance alone, but for justice, for protection, and for the small boy curled in my lap who needed to know the world could be made right again. When the folder labeled evidence sat on the kitchen table that Saturday morning, it looked impossibly ordinary. A neat stack of printouts, a tiny USB with the recording, a child's shaky drawing Lucy had done that mapped the events of that day. It looked like something bureaucratic and dull, and that was the point. The ordinary is often the most lethal when it carries truth. I started with my father. He was stubborn in his gentleness, the sort of man who'd rather carry quiet grief than start a row. I invited him for tea, put the kettle on, and watched his face when he read the transcripts. The color drained from his cheeks, then a slow, steady anger replaced it, the kind that has been smoldering under polite smiles for years. "I should have noticed," he said, voice small. "I should have seen her." He looked up at me. "What do you want to do?" I told him the simplest truth I could. I want to protect the children. I want Claire to understand the damage she caused in a place she cannot ignore. I want the family to see her for who she is. And I want Ethan to see that we stood with him. His hands trembled as if the weight of our family suddenly rested on his palms. He promised then, quietly, to stand with me. That promise mattered more than any theatrical confrontation. It meant I wasn't alone. Next was my brother. He answered my call tight and wary. He'd always been conflict, averse, the peacemaker who slid away from storms. I arranged to meet him at the old cafe where we'd spent childhood summers splitting an ice cream cone. When I slid the printed conversation across the table and watched his eyes follow the words, I expected a rush of defense, a denial, a shield of excuses. Instead, there was only a terrible, soft hollowness I'd never seen in him. I didn't know," he whispered. I thought I didn't want to believe she'd do something like that. His cowardice had enabled Claire, and now he had to choose what kind of man he wanted to be. That choice was the beginning of the unraveling. He listened to the recordings, watched the shaky neighbor video, read Lucy's note. He called Claire under the pretense of asking about a household errand, then brought her to the living room where my father sat, and where I, with my chest steady though my hands shook, played the recording for them both. Claire's face was a mask. When the recorded laugh and the words, "teach him to be spoiled," slid across the speakers, the room seemed to shrink. She recoiled as if the sound burned her. Then she laughed, a brittle sound, and said, "That's taken out of context." My father's hand closed over mine for 1 second, a small anchor, and I reached for the USB. "Context," I said, calm and terrible, "is what you build when nothing is left to hide." I placed the printed note from Lucy on the table. "She saw you, Claire. Lucy told me. She was scared." There was a long, heavy silence. My brother's eyes filled with something like shame. He looked at Claire, then at me, as if the years between us were an ocean he'd finally noticed. What followed was not the theatrical collapse I'd imagined. Claire's defense came in the soft, practiced voice of a woman used to bending the truth until it fit her. She apologized, not the kind that owns harm, but the kind that smooths the surface. "I'm sorry if anyone was hurt," she said, "but you're making a mountain out of a molehill." I had prepared for that. Apologies that try to erase are the tools of manipulators. I accepted her apology, then set consequences in motion that she couldn't spin away with a phrase or a smile. First, I made sure the family knew. My father called the rest of the relatives to a meeting the next Sunday. I stood and told the story plainly, without flourishes. I played the recording. I read Lucy's note. I handed around the printed transcripts. There was shock, then anger, then the slow, inevitable recognition that the person who'd perched like a jewel in our family circle had a dark seam. Words matter, but actions matter more. Claire's facade relied on 2 things, social capital and the belief that people valued her virtue. I chipped away at both. I spoke privately to a colleague of Claire's who'd been mentioned in passing, a woman who had once confided, over coffee, that Claire liked to handle problems decisively. The woman listened, then told me things I had suspected. Claire had a way of making coworkers uncomfortable. She'd dismissed a complaint at the shop with a smile and a cutting joke. Workplaces are fragile ecosystems. Reputation is currency. I drafted an email outlining relevant patterns of behavior, nothing defamatory, only facts, only the truth I had collected, and forwarded it to the boutique's management with a request they review their own records and the veracity of complaints. I wasn't out for ruin. I was out for accountability. When managers called Claire in to discuss professional conduct, the private veneer she'd relied upon split. I also spoke to parents in the neighborhood and at the school. The parenting group where Claire had been the self-appointed center was small but influential. I presented the facts there too, calmly, and with the dignity that can make a moral point sharp as a blade. People listened, parents who had once admired Claire's polished casseroles and perfectly arranged playdates now shifted in their seats. The protective network that had surrounded her loosened. My brother, finally willing to face the truth, did the thing that hurt his